Anirudh Kundu is currently pursuing a Master's of Science in Information, UX, and Human-Centered Information at the, or Interaction, sorry, at the University of Michigan Ann Arbor. He creates happy experiences by humanizing technology. Previously, he designed experiences at Adobe, Tech Mahindra, and Shibaura. How do you say that? I lived in Japan. I should know how to pronounce this. Institute in Japan. With that,
hey guys, am I audible? Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining even after the sumptuous lunch that we just had. So today that I'm going to be talking about emotional architecture and the story of Rubix. Cool. So as we all understand that there's a UX frenzy going on in the world right now, we all want to play around with experiences. And so I kind of bring myself to ask the question, what are these experiences that we, want to play around with? And I'll give you a hint, the root cause of these experiences is essentially emotions. And they happen to be like the backbone of all kinds of human experiences. And that's when I started to think that if we were able to somehow understand what kind of emotions a person was going through at any point of time, then we would be able to successfully understand the kind of experience that they're going through at that particular time. And that's where the concept of cataloging such emotions came into play. And as I said, emotions were the backbone for experiences, and if we were able to understand the emotional state of a person at, say, point A, then we can, safely prompt to what kind of experience they're going through at that particular point. So the question is, how do we catalog emotions? As of now, there are two predominant charters with which we use, with which we catalog emotions. So as you can see on the left-hand side here, there's like all of these psychophysiological data collection methods and techniques, which are essentially fancy machines. They range from EEG devices, eye trackers, heart rate sensors, facial expression analysis, galvanic skin responses, which essentially check the opening and closing of your skin pores and whatnot, and all of these fancy technological support. And on the other hand, we have manual user research techniques, which UX researchers have spent years to just master and hone their skills, wherein they're trying to interview people, do ethnography, shadow people, understand their maybe do cultural probes, and million other UX research techniques. And that's all to essentially catalog a person's emotional state or experience. But as we see that there's a However, in these two distinct charters, there's a big gap that I have very rightly pointed out right there. The problem is that on the left-hand side, when we have all of these, the right-hand side, when we have all of these fancy, machines, tools, and techniques, of course, there are affordability issues because they are very expensive. There are logistical issues with space because they require like heavy equipment and stuff like that. There's usability issues because they require like a really heavy amount of technological know-how that, to be very honest, even I don't have. And then, of course, accessibility issues because, not all UX researchers or people involved in the UX industry have access to such kind of, tech. And on the other hand, when we have these manual user research techniques, what happens is that we rely on the user's ability to articulate their emotions. And now what happens is that in that process, there's like a real big dearth in terms of clarity and even data accuracy. I mean, if you were to ask me what my emotional state is right now, there's a good chance that I might not be able to tell you. I'm excited, but I'm scared at the same time. So those kinds of differences were what was essentially charting this kind of a big gap. So how do we cover this gap? How do we fill it? And that's where I started to think about filling this big gap as an information architecture problem, wherein human emotions were the information and their orientation and assembly, i.e. the architecture. And when I look at it from an information architecture perspective, I was able to find out a couple of building blocks which became the framework for this kind of an emotional architecture. These blocks were colors and cubes. Talking about colors, now this is something that a lot of people have already explored. Psychologists have done this, graphic designers do this, other designers do this, industrial designers do this, just visually creative people just also do this. They all acknowledge the fact that colors and emotions have some sort of a relation. And the thing is that we all know, like, say, red represents some kinds of emotions, green does so, pink and like orange and whatnot, and I've just like cataloged a couple of them here. Yeah, while this was going on, like one of the most predominant studies in this sector was done by Paul Ekman, who was a very famous psychologist who postulated that humans have 6 basic emotions, which are anger, fear, happiness, sadness, disgust, and surprise. And based on this, he was also able to assign certain colors to these 6 emotions. Moving on from colors, we go towards cubes. Now, at the same time, while people were trying to catalog emotions on the plane of colors, there were another set of psychologists who were trying to catalog emotions on a plane of dimensions. And that's where Albert Mehrabian, who was another psychologist, proposed a PAD model, which was based on pleasure, arousal, and dominance. And what they were trying to do was, he was essentially trying to pinpoint emotions on a coordinate plane of 3 axes. And later on, Brent Jason Lance, who furthered Albert's work, was also able to propose like a cubical structure wherein he was trying to map out these emotions. And as we understand, all of these emotions had like a 0, 0, 0 coordinate, which was the PAD model's crux. And so that's what I did. Just like the famous PPAP guy, I had colors on one hand, and I had cubes on the other, and I smushed them together to come up with the Rubik's Cube. Because why not, right? Yeah. So how does it work? And does it work? So the first step is the assignment. Now, as I was just talking about how colors and emotions had like a really handy relationship, they were more than friends. So I was able to map out these basic 6 emotions on the base of those basic 6 colors. Now, what you might notice here is that instead of surprise, on the very extreme left here is neutrality. Now, what later a lot of psychologists found out way after, based on Paul's research, that surprise was actually always either positively or negatively biased. It always had annotations of positivity or negativity attached to it, and it was not the most neutral experience in reality. And that's where, instead of surprise, I chose to go ahead with neutrality. The second step was the arrangement. Now, this is where things start to get a little more interesting. Based on the PAD model, I was able to draw 2 major axes. Now, as you can see, one ranges from happiness to sadness with neutrality in the middle, and the other ranges from anger to fear with disgust in the middle. And I think it's a little hard to understand, but you can see like the flattened out cube right there will be able to give you a better understanding of how those emotions were mapped out. Now, the third step was the intensity. Now, another thing whenever we're trying to catalog experiences is, how much of, how intense that kind of emotional stimuli was. So just like a Rubik's Cube had 3 essential axes of rotations, I was able to catalog them on a scale, so we're all researchers, we understand Likert scales, which are basically ranging from 1 to 3, wherein 1 was the least intense, as you can see on the right there, and then 3 was the most intense amount of emotional, gush that a person felt. And that brought me to part 4, which is the visualization, how all of these different components work together. Now, this is a little complicated, so I'm going to go step by step. So let's say, for example, a person, for step 1, feels feels angry with an intensity of 1. So then they simply turn the cube a degree red. Say the next step is a 1 degree happiness, then comes happiness, then say there's another gush of happiness with again an intensity of 1, so happiness comes up again, and this charter keeps on going until, say, whenever you want to stop. And then the entire emotion is essentially cataloged in some sort of a colored matrix that is able to give like a visual representation of the emotional journey that a person has had. And that was essentially, the kind of model, the kind of method that I essentially came up with. So, the question that we asked earlier, does it work? And in order to find out whether this method essentially worked or not, I started to put it in parallel with the methods that were already working. And you might remember when in the initial slides when I was talking about these fancy machines who were able to already catalog the complexities of human emotions up to a certain extent, I thought, why not pair this humble method that I've created with these and find out if it works or not. Now, we all know that the mind never lies. Now, what you see up here is an EEG model and a brain being visualized while a person is going through an experience. Now, what's happening here is that, that right there was an EEG. It has like all those nodes on your head. They're essentially electrical impulses that are going through your neurons when they're being fired. And you're able to see all these multicolored neurons being fired helter-skelter. And what's happening is that we can pinpoint at a certain part of the brain where a certain kind of an emotion is being elicited based on these firing concentrations and visualization patterns and so on and so forth. But what I always believe and have also believed that things are best understood when experienced. And
it's an overload of emotions. And honestly, it's just so hard to keep track. I just wish I could solve this jumbled Rubik's Cube of mixed emotions. Well, I've got something for you, and all you really need is a Rubik's Cube. Make your brain healthy and keep track while you play.
to where I am right now in this entire venture, wherein we're already getting very positive results, but we're still in this phase of testing our method and seeing the level of success that it has in terms of quantitative data. We're trying to quantify. Not working. Yeah, well, so as I was saying, we're trying to just understand, like, with hard numbers and and to essentially sum up what this entire initiative has been is that even if I acknowledge that this method is far from being perfect as of now and like being taken into like the market and being called like an MVP and whatnot. But the thing is that if we were to catalog such intrinsic and complex information and put it on a simple framework and see whether we could draw some sorts of insights. And that's the purpose of this initiative, is to essentially begin a dialogue of cataloging not just in the built environment but in the intrinsic environment as well. And if I have been able to maybe get you guys even a little bit curious about the test, about the trials and whatnot, and if you want to participate, then I think my presentation would have been a success. I would also have to say a big thanks to these two people. One is Professor Partha and the other is Professor Dan. They've both been monumental in keeping me motivated to pursue this, and we'll see how that goes. That's all I have. Thank you.